Inside Story, and I'm Kate from Jeeni. Today I'm joined by Pete Wyer, creator and composer of Spring Street, which is a New York-based opera, and that will be premiered on Jeeni.com very soon. So Pete, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a beautiful sunny day. We haven't had too many of those. So yeah, I'm doing well, keeping busy with a different opera right now. But yeah, all good.
Okay, so to begin with, why don't you tell us a little about your inspiration for writing Spring Street?
Sure, yeah. So Spring Street came about right here because of Tier 4 lockdown. Basically, what happened, we all know everything about the pandemic that we ever need to know, but basically months and months had gone by and I had been nowhere. I think I'd been away for a week during the year. Christmas was coming and we had a lovely cottage booked, etc., etc. Then we went into Tier 4 lockdown, which meant no Christmas cottage, and sitting here some more. And so while it's not the most sort of artistic, inspirational start point, for me, that was kind of where it began. And I have quite a long-standing relationship with New York. I've been going back and forth for many years. And so in part, for me to reconnect to that, I thought, okay, I need to write something that, that'll keep me occupied and things. And so I came up with the idea of Spring Street. It's a place I know well. And I contacted my friend Yuko Otomo, who lives on Spring Street and who had written poems about it. And her husband, who's sadly passed away in 2019, wrote many poems and is quite a well-known poet. And so I asked her about writing the piece. What did she think about Spring Street? And she loved the idea. And she suggested I basically set one of Steve's books, which I just happen to have here, which was called A Superintendent's Eyes. And I looked at it and I kind of thought, well, it's great. I knew Steve very well and we were very good friends. And I stayed on Spring Street many times. That's a book, it's kind of like a poetic diary of his time as a superintendent in that building. And it's pretty dark and gritty. And it wasn't quite where I wanted to go. In that I've also spent, as I say, a lot of time on Spring Street, and I've found a very diverse place. I haven't worked as a superintendent on this. So I managed to encourage Yuko to include some of her own poems. So for instance, she sent me some poems, but for instance, I had this lovely little chapbook. It is really just about the kitchen wall. The kitchen wall in their apartment is this, it's about that big, and she's written 2 books about the kitchen wall. So it kind of appealed to me to try and set some of this to music. So that was sort of the start point. That was how I got going on Spring Street.
Okay, so without giving too much away, can you tell us briefly what Spring Street is about?
You're asking me? Yeah, following on from the conversation with Yuko, I said to her, what we're describing really is more what you would call a song cycle, the poem set to music, and they're performed in a certain order, and that constitutes a song cycle. And Yuko, kind of like me, sort of said, I'd really rather, it feels like an opera to me. And I said, I agree, but I was also thinking, well, the problem is standalone poems are very different from an opera where traditionally you have a narrative arc, you have characters, you have dialogue, etc., etc. These are very much monologues, and these sort of take you through. But what I found as I went through is actually it was possible to coax some characters out of this. And so what really emerged is I guess kind of like a portrait, my own portrait of Spring Street, where there are 3 fictional characters, but all of whom, for me, come out of the poems of Steve Jadczynski and Yuko Otomo. And so we follow their individual twists and turns, and occasionally they overlap. I have the notion that they're kind of, in a, you've got apartment blocks predominantly. The overwhelming number of people live in, in that sort of setup. And so I simply had the idea that maybe these are three people who live in the same block, and they only interact, they interact unbeknownst to them in other ways and things. So so it's really about three characters who live on Spring Street, who are very different from each other, and who are, as everyone is, quite multifaceted.
So how did you go about selecting the singers?
So with singers, that was one of the easy and more sort of delightful things, in that it's always really nice to think, oh, who could be good for this role? And I've worked with lots of singers because I'm very ancient and have been doing this for a very long time. So I sort of thought about it. So the principal singer in this is Hide Inoue. Hide is about as far from Steve Dalachinsky as you can imagine. As I say, I knew Steve very well, and I know Hide, to a fair degree. We'd worked together on several projects, and with Hide, firstly, he was such an obvious leading man. Everything about him, he's the most lovely human being you could possibly meet, for starters. He has this big smile, everyone loves him, and he looks like a movie star as well, but funny enough, when we had last time we worked together, he played Thor, God of Thunder, and he was very good. He's got this enormous, bass baritone opera voice. But he happened to say, well, being a bass baritone, you don't tend to get the hero roles, because in opera, usually you don't do that. It's just the way we tend to traditionally score the voices and things. The tenors and the sopranos tend to have the principal roles, not always. And the bass baritones usually get to be the bad guys, and he'd actually been the bad guy in an opera of mine we'd done previously. So I thought, okay, well, it would be, firstly, he's got all the qualities of a great leading man, all the charisma, and he's got that huge voice, but it's in a different range than normal. So so I asked Hide, and also to his credit and to the credit of the two other singers, he was up for taking risks. A lot of opera singers would not do the things that Hide did. Hide sang a top C in that. Normally that's the highest note you would give to an operatic soprano. It's up, I can't even see it, it's that high. And so to ask, hey Hide, would you be okay if I just score this note up here and your bass baritone down here? He was great and really game, and so that was great. And then with Joy Tamayo, again, we had worked on several projects before, and I knew she was, again, game for things, and also a practical thing. I knew that she would be able to record herself too. And they were all lovely people. Maren Montalbano was the other singer, mezzo soprano. And again, we've worked together quite a few times. I probably worked with her more than the other two. And firstly, I knew they're all phenomenal singers, and that you just have to take that as read. But then I just knew there were sort of lovely people who wouldn't just say, oh, here's your piece, I sang the dots, what else do you want? So I knew they would all be invested in it. So, and it was great. And for instance, with Joy Tamayo, I asked her something about range, and her voice doesn't go quite as low as most sopranos that I've written for. And I said, oh, that's okay. So, or certainly it's not a strong note for her. And I said, so what's the top end of your voice? And I think it's a top F, which is, I was talking about that note for Hide, well, that's like beyond, on another planet up there. So I ended up writing the piece, a coloratura solo for her. And coloratura is a very not New York thing. It's like 18th century classical writing. You might hear in the Messiah, Handel's Messiah or something, this very ornamental thing. And I just thought, well, okay, for the kind of very quirky characters that we might, very diverse characters, I should say, that we might find on Spring Street, a coloratura solo, I think, fits in just fine. So I wrote her this crazily hard and very, very high solo, which she totally nailed. So they were all great. And the nice thing was, as I say, we'd worked together before. So there wasn't that sort of, oh, I hope this is going to be okay, and having to explain things. There wasn't really time to do that. So
as you've mentioned, you created the opera during a lockdown. So how has it been working on it without kind of being with the rest of the cast face to face?
Really quite weird. Yeah, if there's something I miss, it's that. You know, being able to be in a room with a group of singers and to perform a piece. Any sort of, you know, I love being in theatre. I don't get to do it as often as I would like. So I really missed that. And, you know, being practical, there weren't that many dialogues. Hide, because he had the main role, we had several Zoom sessions and sort of talk through the character and what he's like, because there's quite a lot of complexity to the person he's playing. So from that point of view, it was not everything I would like, but everyone sort of got on board and was great. And also it was really strange because I'm in London, everyone else is in America, and nearly everyone was in New York. So for example, they went out with Matt Gray and filmed, Hide did. And Matt Gray is the director of American Opera Project, and he kindly donated time to film. And Joy managed to come along, so I could see them all doing the thing I would have liked to have been doing myself, you know, out filming it and making the piece and so on. So it was strange, but it was, you know, part of being the composer is this bit too of kind of, okay, sitting here. I also wrote it very, very fast. Steve was a big improviser. And so often the settings were, I'd almost kind of sing them and write them and I'd say, okay, that's it. And so it was a very quick, spontaneous process too, which was helpful.
So during your career, you've created scores for the London Symphony Orchestra, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the Welsh National Opera. I mean, I could go on. So, and as well as that, you've obviously got operas and concert works under your belt as well. So out of everything you've done, what are you most proud of?
I think it's this interview, actually, Kate. I think,
good answer.
It's my pinnacle. You know, I don't know, and if I'm honest, I don't look back all that much, or occasionally I do because I'm on Facebook and Facebook says, remember you did this, and I'm going,
this day 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I was so much younger then. What happened? So I probably the thing I'm proudest of, probably after we've spoken, I think, why did I say that? But I've created these things called iForests, which are these immersive installations. So for example, last year I did a piece for Los Angeles Descanso Gardens, which has 72 speakers, and they're all independent speakers. And I wrote this massive sort of choral score for 72 voices to be spread out over the land there. And I feel very good about that because I feel like, firstly, the process of writing, I've created a scoring system of my own, which, as well as writing for the things you normally write for in music, pitch, rhythm, tone, and dynamic, my scores also incorporate space. So literally, you know, I'm writing for a voice that's going to be over there, and then this one's going to answer over here, and so on. So I have to, and that's a process that's taken sort of years to develop. And for example, the LA piece, I see they had about 245,000 visitors during the time the installation was there. So, and I've done a bunch of them that have been pretty popular. So I feel quite proud about those. Oh, sorry, I have, should be off. So I feel proud of the fact that I sort of evolved this system, and now it's sort of spread out. I'm doing one in the UK, or other ones in America, and so on. And you know, I get to write the things I want to write. It's not like I'm just someone's telling me write me this, write me that. You know, as working as a craftsman, but I'm working as an artist with a system that I've sort of developed. So I guess, yeah, let's go for that one. Or it could be this interview. It's probably still this interview, actually. So
as you mentioned earlier, you found it kind of odd, like working in the pandemic and not being with people face to face. But going back to, I've got an example here, 2015, you were the composer and musical director for the 175th anniversary of Cynwyd in Liverpool and drew crowds of over 60,000. So you must be pleased that sort of pandemic restrictions are finally starting to be lifted so that places like opera houses and theatres can open again.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's a wonderful thing. In a normal year, for instance, last year, I would have traveled probably at least for probably 5 months of the year, a lot of it in America and around Europe and things. And of course, I went nowhere. So that's a really important part of my life to me. I go on writing retreats. I have many friends, particularly in America. So from a personal point of view, it's a really big deal. Less of my career is in theatres now. I would love it, but I've moved more towards the installations that I was just talking about. So I'm still doing those, and it's a delight whenever I get to do them. But for instance, last year, ironically, I didn't get to any of my own pieces, but I think overall there are about 400,000 visitors to my different installations around, all of which were in America. So hopefully that sort of continues. If anything, that was bolstered because people couldn't go to indoor things. But from a personal point of view, as I say, being able to go somewhere simply to write and be somewhere beautiful, or to see friends like everyone else, that's a very, very welcome thing. Yeah.
And so Spring Street is going to be live streamed on Jeeni, as I mentioned earlier, and we're aiming for a global audience. So how does it feel to sort of break free from fixed locations like concert halls and the things we were just talking about?
Yeah, honestly, it feels great. I love it. I do feel, one of the things I feel really good about with Spring Street is, I think when I was speaking with Yuko, for instance, I think she was envisaging a very experimental opera in terms of experimental music, which can be very sort of strange and beguiling. It could be many, many things, but probably I wrote a more musically, more sort of approachable piece, and that was really what I wanted to do. But what I think is more daring and more interesting to me is to present it in, I guess, what I would call like a Netflix format, because that's how we experience pieces these days. I do. So having an opera where you can say, okay, well, I'm a bit bored with that thing, but I love coloratura. I only want the coloratura. So I like the idea that actually you can just go to that part. So I think it's fun. And we've actually made film. I didn't even anticipate making film. I had the most fundamental ideas around it, and people were just very generous and actually went out and shot things and so on. So we have complete film for this. But yeah, I think it's the way to go. I think operas quite often in the 20th century, late 20th century and 21st century had a question around, well, what do we do now? Grand opera became this big thing with big audiences, which of course costs a fortune. You put a chorus, an orchestra, principal singers, sets, big houses. It's a very expensive, it's a gorgeous form. But I think a lot of people who like opera in modern day, composers and producers and writers, etc., have struggled with, well, what's interesting, and certainly, so this interests, there are a whole bunch of operas that are now coming out as films in various forms, and I'm really pleased to be a small part of that and say, okay, well, this is my thing, and take a chapter and see if you like it, and maybe follow the journey of this character or this character. And so on. So yeah, I feel very fortunate. I feel very fortunate working with Jeeni. It feels like a nicely timed sort of coming together of things.
Okay, so finally, to kind of wrap up on everything you just said, you could have quite easily gone to Netflix with this production. So why Jeeni? Why are we so honoured?
I'm very glad you feel honoured. So honestly, firstly, I think I first knew of Jeeni through, there is something on there called Hairy London, which is a fantastic, bizarre and sort of comical story piece in a sort of a bizarre Victorian London, anyway, which I really loved. And so I knew of that. And so I looked at Jeeni, at the actual platform, and it just struck me that this is actually doing really good work with artists, and its artist center particularly obviously appealed to me. I thought, and you know, the more I've learned, the more it's been a really nice and very happy experience. So I think that's kind of the easy answer.
Perfect, and we are honoured that you've chosen Jeeni, and we can't wait for the opera. And like I said, that will be streamed in July on Jeeni, and we're really, really looking forward to it. So thank you so much for your time today, Pete. It was lovely to chat with you.
Thank you, Kate. It's absolutely my pleasure.